Right, of course, we do continue on this end to monitor those reactions on the ground. Mbalenhle Mthethwa, together with my colleague Patricia, trying to get a sense on the state of the SOPA by Gauteng Premier Panyaza Lesufi, giving us a sense, of course, on what the views are around this matter. On this end, we, of course, continue to bring you those reactions as we bring in political analyst Dr. Dale McKinley, who joins us for more analysis on Gauteng State of the Province address. Dale, very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. I mean, we've just listened in to Gauteng Premier Panyaza Lesufi really give this address. But of course, we know, given the reaction from some of the political parties, that his tenure has been marked by persistent issues when it comes to crime and unemployment. What do you make of what he had to say this evening?
Good evening, Paul, and to your viewers as well. Listen, I think it was a mixed bag. I was listening to some of the reactions from the political parties, and I would agree with some of the analysis that was made there. Much of the speech was a repeat of previous promises related to particularly infrastructure, job creation, crime prevention. And yet there was a few sort of new things in terms of investment initiatives and I think a realization that the province is in crisis on a range of different fronts, and that there is a need to go beyond the normal. There's a need to actually have some serious interventions in relation to, for example, the water crisis, the cable theft crisis, as well as some of the infrastructural problems like roads and transport as well. But, so in some ways you could say the Premier was addressing some of the crisis situation, and then for that, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It might be a little bit late, but in the relationship to a range of the problems in the province, I think it was an underwhelming address. The sense that the Premier is sort of like trying to catch up after 2 sort of years of a lot of promises and not very much progress. And I think, across the board, even within his own party, there would be a recognition that this is something that this crisis requires urgent intervention and radical intervention, as opposed to some of the same kinds of programs and promises that he's made for the last 2 years.
Very well. Dr. McKinley, I'm going to ask you to hold that thought as we do continue, of course, going back on the ground to get reaction from some of the politicians there. My colleague Patricia is monitoring those reactions. Patricia, what's been said when it comes to what Gauteng Premier Panyaza Lesufi had to deliver this evening? Okay, we're going to have to re-establish that connection as we continue on this end to monitor the reaction on the ground. Dr. McKinley, as you speak about some of the investment interventions and really just also looking at what Panyaza Lesufi had to say last year. I mean, some of the politicians who are giving reaction this morning, like the DA, I mean, they say they felt abused because it was a mere regurgitation of what has been said in previous years when it comes to moving from paper-based to digitized patient files in hospitals. That still hasn't happened. Really just looking at the finer details of the promises that have been made but are yet to be delivered.
Yeah, I think that's, the Premier has sort of delved into grand plans, the big picture. And yet, to deal with the crises we have in our province, you need to get down on the ground. You need teams that are there listening to people, that are dealing with the problems, and a government that's seen to be acting in conjunction with local government, in particular the city of Tshwane and obviously Johannesburg and Ekurhuleni, but as well as with across the section. It's, I think the last national and provincial elections gave very strong indication that our province is very divided politically. And so this sort of trying to govern in a sense of saying, well, we've got these massive plans. Let's take, for example, the Gautrain initiative that was announced a couple of years ago. This was going to be extended. There's a massive Gautrain expansion. The infrastructure is going to start. We've seen nothing of that. Let's take, for example, the Panyaza's green bombers or his wardens, 12,000 of them. And yet what we've seen, the National Police Minister just the other day indicated that Gauteng's crime rate, and particularly serious crime rate, is escalating. So, these kinds of things, what sometimes appears on the surface and then what is the reality of people's day-to-day experiences is very different. And I think there's a feeling that the Premier has been a bit of a grandstander and not much of a deliverer.
We do continue to bring you some analysis from political analyst Dr. Dale McKinley, who is still with us on the line there. Dr. McKinley, we've just listened to some of these reactions from education concerns, assistant teacher contracts, and the wardens, the crime wardens, who are not fully equipped to battle the crime on the ground. I mean, as we close off, just touch on some of these pointers and where the loopholes may be falling.
Well, I think, first of all, the introduction of the crime wardens was a mistake to begin with. We have law enforcement services, and it's called the South African Police Services. And we should be relying on the South African Police Services to enforce the law. There are many, many examples of the wardens basically violating people's rights, violating the law. They're not supposed to be doing what they're doing. And I think it was a huge mistake and a waste of resources. But besides that, in relation to the educational, social services, the other competencies of the provincial government, for example, when we talk about accountability, I was just hearing the ANC politicians talking about delivery and accountability. Well, if there's going to be accountability, let's start with the biggest accountability crisis in the province, which is in the health sector, in the hospitals. Has anybody been held accountable for the massive amounts of money that has been stolen, the hits, the assassinations that took place, for the whistleblowers? We haven't seen much of that. And I think, that's why it's not to try to, say that there's nothing in the State of the Province address and everything is not working. There's obviously some things that are being done correctly. But I think the general feeling is that where the real crises are, where the basic things on a day-to-day basis, our safety, our roads, our education, our health, these are seriously lacking leadership and seriously lacking the kind of, it's not just about throwing resources, it's about the capacity and ensuring that you are sustain those kinds of programs, not just pour money in and then it just disappears after a year or two. And I think that's the legacy that the Premier has to grapple with. We can look at every year's State of the Province address and we can critique it for particular reasons, but I think the overall legacy is looking at the last 3 or 4 years and asking, where are we now versus where we were 3 or 4 years ago? Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, I think in the context of this, we're not in a better position than we were back in when he began his tenure.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for weighing in on this discussion. Of course, as we wrap our conversation, we continue on the other side of this to bring you more reaction and some of the highlights from Gauteng's State of the Province with Gauteng Premier Panyaza Lesufi.